Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar that we are hosting as a Europe Direct Center, Europe Direct Core Platform to be specific. For those of you who have been following us for a while now, we have been hosting a number of webinars through which we have tackled various topics that are emanating from policies or legislation from the European Union. And today we have chosen a very important topic, which, however, doesn't get discussed very often, which is the topic of public procurement. And we're looking at this topic from the point of view of innovation, sustainability, and social progress. And we will be discussing how this can be a tool for progress in this area. So together with me today, I have a very esteemed panel of guests. We have with us today Lorraine Manjon-Duca, who is Director, Procurement Policy and Quality Assurance within the Department of Contracts. We also have Daniel Schembri from Cooperative Malta. He's actually the CEO of this organization. And last but definitely not least, we have Victor Fiorini, who is the Senior Manager within the Family Business Office. And he's here today because he is in charge with the implementation of the Social Enterprise Act. So we're going to kick off with a presentation just to introduce the topic a little bit, and then we'll jump into the panel discussion. So public procurement, very often when we think of procurement, we think of tender documents, we think of compliance checklists, we think of evaluation grids, but really public procurement is a very powerful tool which governments possess, through which they can influence the market, they can steer behavior, and they can also create the kind of society that we want to live in now at the end of the day. And in fact, across the European Union, public procurement represents around 14% of GDP, so that's quite substantial. It means that for every euro that we spend as consumers, governments and public authorities together are spending another 14 cents, and they can choose how those cents are spent. So whether that spending reinforces the status quo, or whether we can use it as a tool to drive change, that depends entirely on how procurement is designed and implemented. So we're starting with the idea that public procurement is a market shaper. As I said, traditionally this was seen as something technical, an administrative exercise, and the focus was very much on transparency, on ensuring fairness, and also of offering value for money. And these principles do remain fundamental, but today value for money means more than just the lower price. It means the best value for society, for the environment, and for the long term. And this shift has been recognized and embedded in EU law. For example, we have the Public Procurement Directive, which it encourages contracting authorities to consider social, environmental, and innovation-related criteria. And this directive, in fact, speaks of the concept of the most economically advantageous tender, not just the cheapest, but the one which delivers the greatest overall benefit when you factor in quality, sustainability, and also life cycle cost. So what this means in practice is that public authorities are no longer neutral market participants. They are market makers. They are able to use their purchasing power to set demand for green technologies, to demand and expect fair labor conditions from their suppliers, and also to promote inclusive services and also innovative solutions. So if the state buys sustainably, the idea is that then the market will adapt. So if we reward innovation, innovators will respond. And so procurement becomes not just a mechanism to buy what already exists, but also a policy tool to create something that doesn't necessarily exist on the market, or as it exists, but there isn't high demand for it. Which brings me then to the concept of green public procurement, which is something that the EU has been promoting for quite some time now, over 2 decades. But in recent years, of course, because we've had the European Green Deal, we've seen acceleration in terms of this principle. So for those who are not perhaps familiar with what this means, we're talking about ensuring that the products, the services, and the works that are purchased by public authorities have a reduced environmental impact throughout their whole life cycle. So it means having to think about, for instance, the materials that are used, their recyclability, thinking about energy efficiency or the emissions that are connected to that product or that service, waste reduction, end-of-life management, and also, for instance, sustainable transport and logistics. And the European Commission, again, has developed a number of criteria for a variety of products and service groups. So looking at, for instance, office paper, IT equipment, cleaning services, they are criteria which are intended to make it easier for contracting authorities to include environmental considerations without having to start from scratch. But it's important to keep in mind, however, that green public procurement is not just about compliance or image, but again, it's about creating that demand to drive green innovation. So we see, for instance, when public authorities set high standards for, let's say, energy efficiency in buildings, they are stimulating the construction sector to adopt better materials and techniques. And on the other hand, for instance, when they prioritize low-emission vehicles, again, they are accelerating the transition within the transport industry. We have a number of directives, again, and regulations which make green public procurement mandatory in certain sectors. We have, for instance, the Clean Vehicles Directive, which sets national targets for the public procurement of zero and low emission vehicles. And we also have the Energy Efficiency Directive, which encourages, amongst a number of other things, it encourages public buildings to lead by example when it comes to renovation and energy performance. So in short, every euro of public money that is spent through green public procurement, it can double as a euro invested in the green transition. We then also have the concept of socially responsible public procurement alongside the green public procurement criteria, but it is an equally important concept. One, the green public procurement focuses on the planet, whereas the socially responsible public procurement concept focuses more on people, of course. And this, in turn, is intended to ensure that public purchases contribute to positive social outcomes rather than the environmental outcomes. Here we're talking about issues such as decent working conditions, the inclusion of disadvantaged persons, accessibility for persons with different abilities, the promotion of gender equality and the mainstreaming of equality issues within the procurement process, and also the promotion of ethical supply chains, just to give some examples. The European Union has a guidance document which relates to this. It's called Buying Social. It was last updated in 2021, and this gives us practical ways through which we can integrate social value at every stage. So starting from defining the technical specifications, going towards the selection and the award criteria, and then finally also contract performance. And then we also have another important provision which is very underutilized, However, it's very impactful, and this is the reserved contract mechanism, which is foreseen under Article 20 of the Procurement Directive, and this allows contracting authorities to reserve certain contracts either for social enterprises or for sheltered workshops that employ disadvantaged persons. It's a simple clause, but of course it can be transformative because it enables public bodies to channel economic activities towards organizations that in turn reinvest their profits into community benefit rather than just shareholder gains. And in Malta, as we are preparing the action plan on the social economy, here we have a real opportunity to link procurement with the growth of our social enterprise ecosystem. We know that this kind of procurement can ensure that social enterprises are not only recognized legally, but also have tangible market opportunities to deliver public value. So we have a provision there, we have a tool. It would be great to see how it's going to be put into practice. Public procurement can also be a driver of innovation. So we've looked at the environmental angle, we've looked at the social angle. Innovation is a cross-cutting theme. Now it can also bring about environmental and social benefits. So besides this, alongside the sustainability, I would say, public procurement can also be a catalyst for innovation. And again, the European Union encourages contracting authorities to think beyond the off-the-shelf solutions which are available on the market and instead ask perhaps what outcome do we want to achieve and how might the market help us get there. So this is the approach which is at the very heart of the concept of innovation procurement. So using procurement to stimulate the development or the deployment of new technologies or approaches that don't yet exist at scale. So we can have technologies that perhaps exist, but there isn't a lot of uptake of such technologies. So this could be an opportunity to promote the uptake of these new innovations. We have innovation procurement guidelines, and they outline certain mechanisms. For instance, the pre-commercial procurement, where authorities would buy R&D services to co-develop solutions with suppliers. And we also have public procurement of innovative solutions, where authorities can act as first buyers of innovations not yet widely available. And we have seen a number of examples across Europe where this kind of innovation procurement has been put into practice. There are examples in the Netherlands, in Finland, in Spain. So these are examples which show us how the public sector can both be a demand creator and also an innovation partner, and at the same time promote social and environmental considerations as well. Why this matters for Malta? Malta, we are at an important juncture. We have the capacity and the ambition to align our procurement practices with the EU's broader sustainability and innovation agenda, but we need to make that alignment perhaps a little bit more visible or a little bit more consistent and maybe a little bit more strategic as well. So in order to implement green public procurement, social responsible public procurement or innovation procurement, we need maybe a clearer policy direction. We need definitely more training and capacity building for procurement officers. And we certainly as well need better data on sustainable procurement outcomes. But perhaps what we need more than anything is a mindset shift, no? So going from the idea of how do we get this contract awarded as quickly as possible to how do we use this contract to create value for society. And it also requires collaboration between regulators, between contracting authorities, social enterprises, cooperatives, business, and civil society more broadly as well. Because, of course, sustainability is not just an environmental or social goal, it's an economic opportunity at the end of the day. So when we design procurement that rewards innovation, which promotes inclusion and sustainability, we're also supporting job creation, competitiveness, and resilience. So a final thought from me before we jump into our discussion. So every public tender is an opportunity to shape the future of our island and of Europe. So through every procurement decision, we can choose to stick to the old models, or else we can choose to direct public funds, public money towards a greener, fairer, and more innovative Malta and a more innovative Europe. The legal framework is there, the guidance is there, the tools are there. So what we need now is a shared commitment to make sure that public procurement in Malta becomes a force not just for efficiency, but also for impact. And I stop here, and perhaps we can jump in and start our discussion on the matter. I just wanted to frame our conversation a little bit by sharing a little bit about the legal framework and the policy framework. But of course, you are the experts, and together we can explore how we can put these ideas into practice. Maybe I can start with you, Lorraine, if you allow me. I mentioned in my presentation, public procurement represents nearly 14% of the EU's GDP. So from your point of view, how do you see that embedding social and environmental considerations in procurement can happen? Do you see it as a tool for change, both in the EU and here in Malta as well, given as well our different contexts?
Yes, I think that we can all agree that, as you mentioned as well, public procurement is one of the most powerful instruments, tools that we can have to drive meaningful change, socially, environmentally, and also economically. And as you mentioned in your presentation, with nearly 14% of the EU's GDP flowing through procurement, you mentioned also a very interesting way how you described how the 14% GDP reflects in actual expenditure. Obviously, public authorities and specifically public buyers, we are uniquely positioned to deliver these policy goals that ultimately matter to the citizens. So from my perspective, which is a public procurement perspective, embedding social and environmental considerations and innovative considerations in our procurement is not just about compliance, but it is more about leadership. You mentioned as well government leading by example. So integrating these sustainability criteria in our technical specifications, contract clauses, in our award criteria, we can actively promote these fair working conditions, reducing emissions, and also, why not support vulnerable groups? So there are real-world impacts and for our society that procurement can help achieve. At EU level, even as Malta, as a Department of Contracts, we have participated also in collaborative projects at EU level. One was held, in fact, in the past couple of years. It was an organization of workshops with 27 member states to develop a dialogue for the use of public procurement for strategic purposes, what is known as strategic public procurement, that incorporates precisely green, social, and innovation procurement. So such experiences for us, it has shown us how sharing, learning, and strategic alignment with other member states can also help us develop a roadmap for public procurement when it comes to these concepts.
From your experience, Lorraine, in this project, do you see that other countries are more advanced than us in relation to this, or is everyone sort of at the early stages of their journey?
Frankly speaking, for example, when it comes to GPP, we are quite advanced compared to other member states. We have a very structured way on how we deal with green public procurement through a national action plan. We are in the second national action plan. Obviously, Malta's reality, being the smaller member state, we have a little advantage because also the Department of Contracts, as the regulator of all of the contracting authorities, we do not have a lot of spilling over and divisions between local government and sub-central authorities. So it is easier for us to monitor our public procurement when it comes to the green aspect. With regards to the social aspect, we are also, with the help of Victor, who is here today, trying to, as much as possible, push forward the social agenda. And you mentioned the buying social. There was also a publication of a good practices toolbox, which Malta was in fact one of the case studies that was mentioned in that toolbox. When it comes to innovation, we have other competent authorities that are helping us trying to push forward as well innovation. So from the three aspects, when comparing to other member states, we are still trying to catch up when it comes to innovation, how it can be incorporated in our day-to-day procurement processes. When it comes to social, we have an action plan. We are trying to get there. When it comes to green, we are quite advanced. So it's a mix of both. But from our experiences, more than anything else, we realized the importance of these kind of dialogues, networking, and also knowing who the stakeholders are, and actually try to instill this. It's a culture shift at the end of the day, because we all know how to do procurement, but now we are embedding these concepts. And you have to shift people from doing procurement one way and looking for the value for money only financially and economically, and rather than now we have to introduce new concepts. So that's the experience that we had. We are alongside the others, and it's a good experience to network with other member states. So that's how, more than anything else, what we took from this project. And the good thing is that the Commission keeps following up. So it's not something that a project was implemented and everything stops there. So even until you have a legislation, a regulation that actually imposes something, it is an issue of governments getting together and actually pushing forward these concepts. So the most important thing is having support at the central level.
Indeed, it is. Of course, change is never easy. So I think as human beings, our natural instinct is a little bit to resist change. But it's very encouraging and reassuring to hear that there's so much work happening on this front. Perhaps very few people are aware, and very few stakeholders, are external stakeholders, which are not public authorities, are aware of the work that is going on in this regard. Victor, we're talking about socially responsible public procurement and also green public procurement, maybe as a tool also to help us progress towards our national and ultimately also our EU priorities, including the social economy agenda. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's very important that we realize that public procurement is a very strong policy tool, okay? And it's not just a procedural means to purchase an item and a service. And I think that's what we need contracting authorities to realize more. It aligns the government purchasing power with its social objectives. So effectively what we're saying is that we can use public procurement, we can use our money in the way we spend, in addition to other efforts that we are making to achieve social objectives, right? I mean, there are strategies, there's funding in place for a number of social projects. Let's add to that public procurement. Let's align it better to achieve those social objectives. And this can be done through the inclusion of social criteria, for example, in tenders, through the use of reserved contracts, for example, that you have referred to. Now, speaking from the perspective of the social economy agenda, now the Family Business Office is tasked with implementing the Social Enterprise Act, and we're working hard to make this a reality. And the implementation of the Act will be the first step to take. But then we need to talk about a strategy on the social economy in general. So it's worth reminding at this point that social economy actors are those entities operating entrepreneurially, but whose main objective is to achieve a social objective or more than one, and reinvest their profits back into precisely those social objectives. So when we look at the social economy agenda, we are a social economy national action plan. We will be looking at a variety of things, right? We're going to be looking at how we monitor it to data and statistics, for example, how to improve access to funding. And an important aspect will be how to improve access to markets for social economy actors. And therefore, in that respect, we need to start making more use of socially responsible public procurement. Because effectively, in the chapter, so to speak, that's going to be talking about access to markets, how we make it more possible for social enterprises and social economy actors to access the markets, we need to be talking then about how we as government draft our tenders. Right? So how can we make it easier for social enterprises to precisely have that access to tendering?
Very good. Linking to what Victor is saying, Daniel, we know that cooperatives, which can also be social enterprises at the end of the day, they bring strong social value to the table, no? So do you see that socially responsible public procurement, perhaps also green procurement or innovation procurement, can help unlock their potential in our economy?
Yes, indeed, definitely. You are right. Then cooperatives can be as well as social enterprises. And specifically on the word social, one would have to be like a bit careful. Maybe it needs a bit of clarification. In the PowerPoint, and you go into minority groups or gender. But social economy can as well have to do with a lot with quality of life, right? Mm-hmm. Quality, social culture, as in the community, which is, has better mental health, has better access to health services, to green areas, and a whole lot. Yes, definitely. At the moment, through the experience of the food co-op is the co-op that we have registered now. I believe I'm experiencing something where the idea of an enterprise and the idea of a social impact are merged into one. People, I would say, care less about the veggies, but care more about the impact it has on society. And therefore, for example, I wouldn't say we're pushing the supermarkets away, but people are very much in tune with the fact that there is an alternative, there is an option. So what I'm trying to hone on here is the fact that social impact can be measured in many ways. Yeah. Green public procurement probably it's much easier it's much more measurable. Social would be a bit less. I think in our case, it very much depends on the person verifying, checking the details, whether he or she is well informed or not informed about social impact, quality of life. And that's a question maybe that just have to be addressed to you, Lorraine, later on. Like, how would people measure the impact, the effect of one project versus another? But yes, I think that's It's basically it.
In fact, if I may intervene, like Daniel is saying, defining what exactly we mean by innovation in procurement, how we can achieve the social aspect in procurement. And like Daniel exactly said, he really explained it very well, brought up the argument very well. Perhaps in the green aspect, it is very easy to identify what we mean by green effect and how it can be embedded in the procurement process. Tying to your earlier question when you said how are the other member states faring and how are we faring compared to the others. So that's something that really is on our awareness agenda, let's say, that we have to first tell our public buyers what we mean by buying social, what we mean by buying in an innovative manner, because as I said, the green aspect, perhaps it has been covered over more than a decade, so we are more used and it is very much embedded in the procurement process. So that's a very, very important way how you described it.
Knowing what the main topics are, the main issues, like Times of World about a month ago issued a number of things that are affecting people in terms of their social, I would say, the quality of life. Let's call it quality of life. It's better than the word social. I come from I have first degrees in social work, and social work puts a lot of emphasis on positive discrimination. So you would be spending money and resources and access to people from disadvantaged groups, making sure that they are gaining access and therefore equal opportunity, not sameness. And it's a beautiful concept, but sometimes people might understand that we're only talking about minority groups. I think here we're talking about all of us, correct?
Many things. If we look at the definition, for example, in the Social Enterprise Act, the social also incorporates the environmental, the cultural, the health. So
exactly.
It's a very broad definition which links to well-being, as you're rightly saying.
Yes. And if I recall well, on Times of Water, there were about 5 different topics where people said these are affecting us. One of them was probably pollution, or I remember corruption came in last, which there was a shift. So it was number 1 or number 2. Now it's number 5. So I think the objectives are pretty much there, written on the wall, what people are after when they talk about the social goal being achieved. However, then again, the question is how you're going to measure and how you're going to decide what to buy in terms of something which is not always that measurable. As in, when you say the lowest price. So it's always it's clear as daylight, But how do you assess other projects and other purchases? That's quite a challenge.
Lorraine, if I may, maybe I come back to you, also linking to what Daniel's saying. So from a procurement practitioner's point of view, how easy or difficult is it to integrate these green or social criteria into tenders? And would it then make the process too complex?
Yes, I think we can all agree that procurement in itself by nature is a very highly regulated process, and rightly so. Earlier you mentioned that we have to find a balance between the transparency, the value for money, and these added concepts in the periphery. Okay, so now we have to embed those concepts that for the time being they are in the periphery, but within the structure, this highly regulated process, I believe there is room for creativity, the impact, the purpose, to embed the green and social criteria in a way that our public procurers have to feel it becomes natural and achievable, not burdensome. So, as I said, for example, in the green aspect, we have a very structured guidance on how these have to be embedded mandatorily for some categories, others are not mandatory. And we have a whole system on how to monitor. At the Department of Contracts in these past years, we have worked a lot on simplifying this integration of the social, the green and the innovative aspect through standardization mainly of our templates, introducing model clauses, guidance documents, and obviously providing our guidance throughout the process. Obviously, electronic procurement helps also the accessibility of this the standardization of public procurement, and also streamlining how these criteria are applied and actually evaluated. And aside from being applied and evaluated, public buyers need also to know how to implement them, because public procurement is not just about managing to signing a contract, but you have to ensure that once you implement, you are implementing in line with what was published and with what was actually signed. So we acknowledge that in these aspects, the contracting authorities need clarity, they need confidence that we also centrally know what exactly we are imparting and how we are guiding them. So more than anything else, effective ways on how to integrate them aside from the standardization. We invest a lot in ongoing training, in open dialogue and in networking, as I also mentioned earlier. We help our practitioners see, hopefully they manage to see, that sustainable procurement is not adding complexity to our processes, but rather it is actually adding value. So if the tools are clear and the process is supported, we hope that in the fullness of time, public buyers look at sustainability as a second nature. So these are also, for example, supported by contract circulars and various documents that we publish from time to time.
I think that's key. The training which you mentioned, and the communication, of course, to follow up, because a one-off training, of course, doesn't change a mindset. And here we're talking about changing a culture, and hopefully, maybe not in the distant future, this kind of procurement becomes the mainstream form of procurement, because at the end of the day, as you rightly said, it's about adding value. But yes, I also understand that it can be a little bit daunting to add what can be perceived as an additional layer of bureaucracy and technicality. From the point of view then of the seller, the tenderer, Daniel, if I may, you deal with obviously smaller organizations, cooperatives. So are there any maybe practical changes which you think, or incentives that perhaps would make it easier for these smaller organizations to participate in public tenders?
Yes, no, definitely. I think an issue that we face more often than not has to do with the fact that the people on the other end of the spectrum are not clear what a cooperative is. So we get asked like, okay, but are you a VO? Are you this? Are you that? Which clearly shows that there are some people who are well informed and many others who are less informed. Also, some of the documentation does not include the word cooperatives. That makes the big challenge. And it's not just government. That's we go to banks, and some banks like cooperatives are like, what, they know what to do well. Others, they have more questions than they have answers, and they will ask us a lot of questions. Particularly in our case, because it's a cooperative, there is no concept of ultimate beneficial owner. If there are 5 members or more, no one owning 25% of the business, and you tell them, okay, but we're 100 people. 100 people, who are you? 100 people, like, you know, like it makes things a bit more complex. I think the solution would always be that rather than being the beneficiary, we would be part of the discussions when these things are being designed. We have been asking, what is a non-political organization, and we have been asking to be part of the MTSD for quite some time. Because most of the people hear about all the other issues except the social, except the cooperative. And green, I would say green, I think it's very much on the agenda. I mean, probably, I don't know, 3 of every 5 people I know, they are aware of the Green Deal in some way or another. Okay, and even these things that you get money for, to buy electric vehicles and stuff. That those are, they're so visible. Yeah, tangible. They're so visible. They're so visible. But what we always ask is, and then I think Lorraine, you said it right. Networking really helps, but there needs to be a bit more, a bit more active participation in the designing of an application, the designing of a tender. Also, another point, maybe, and what I'm finding myself is that the government has become pretty evolved. They hire a lot of people, and a lot of agencies and a lot of authorities are themselves competing with their prices. So, in a when you come to, let's say, going for a tender, it could be that an agency X has much more people who have more time on their hands to apply for a particular fund rather than what a social enterprise or cooperative would have. So there's a competition now within, even between government and non-government organizations.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective because you have a non-economic operator, so to speak, that's kind of competing in the market.
And as you said, 14%, it's a lot. 40%, one would consider that to be a disruptor. I mean, 40% you can say, you can disrupt where the economy goes. Okay, we've just seen it now in the budget, for example. There's a lot of emphasis on family with having more than one child. Clearly, that's positive discrimination in favor of those who have families or are about to have more kids in the family. So when the government now has so many people in many departments, I say so many people compared to what I remember a few years back. There are a lot of people and agencies and other bodies which are themselves applying for the same pool of resources. So it's another competition. Anyway, it's not a bad thing, but it's just there.
It's there and it needs to be taken into consideration as well.
Yes.
Victor, I'm going to come to you. We've touched upon this point a little bit, but maybe we can delve in a little bit further. So from the perspective of the regulator now, eventually of social enterprises, of course, a leading stakeholder within the broader social economy as well. So specifically, how do you see that socially responsible public procurement, potential innovation procurement as well, can contribute to strengthening Malta's social economy? We have quite an active social economy. We had to factor in all the different players. Of course, we are not organized as such, so we don't really see the social economy, but it's there. We have a number of players. So how do you see that procurement can help strengthen the work and the impact of these stakeholders?
Sure. So I believe that social economy actors will be best in a better place to bid for tenders if we make better use of social criteria, or even if we make use of reserved contracts. This is because the very nature of a social enterprise and its modus operandi, the way it works. Sometimes it's around participatory, for example, structures. Sometimes it is the inclusion of vulnerable groups, disadvantaged workers. Because the very nature of social enterprises achieves social objectives. Therefore, if we make better use of socially responsible public procurement, we are giving better access to an income stream, better access to markets. Now, that doesn't mean that social enterprises will necessarily not have to compete. Calls would still be open for competition, including reserved contracts, because it would not be exclusively for one entity, but for a group of entities that are looking to integrate people coming from disadvantaged background, for instance. However, if we make more emphasis, if we convince more contracting authorities to make more use of socially responsible public procurement, effectively what we're telling social enterprises is, look, there's a market available for you. You can compete. It's not exclusive to you, but you are better placed now to be awarded those extra points, for instance. We are already in talks with Lorraine and her team. We speak very frequently and we share a lot of intel. And surely when we draft an action plan on the social economy, we will be doing with them when it comes to socially responsible public procurement. We can go and speak to contracting authorities. We can create training sessions, and Lorraine and her team can create draft templates. But then one has to ask the next question: are social economy actors ready to bid? So that is a very important, which it's something that maybe we can discuss later on. But I think it's a very important fact, referring to what Daniel has said, that there is dialogue in the first place, because from our end, can come up with a number of ideas for tenders that are more open to social enterprises. But then if no one bids from the social economy angle, then understandably contracting authorities might ask, okay, but is it worth me including social objectives, social criteria the next time? Because no one has bid. So in that respect, I think it is very important that a dialogue of sorts start with the social economy enterprises, cooperatives, other social economy organizations, in order to understand what does it take for you to bid. Because rules are there, we cannot do away with procurement regulations. They are there for a reason. We need to respect them, but we can certainly see how to make them more accessible. We can also talk about the private sector, so the traditional businesses forming consortia, for example, with social economy actors so they can bid together. We can talk about, again, let's just say traditional businesses using social economy actors in their supply chains, for example, in order to bid and to deliver that service to the public buyer. So I think there's a lot of angles that we need to look into. Getting contracting authorities to start adding social criteria or making more use of reserve contracts is just one aspect. And I'm not saying it's easy, but I think we will get there. We will get there. If we have a strategy in place which frames what we want to do, how we want to achieve it, what are the targets, we can get contracting authorities that do it. But we need to avoid a situation where no one bids, because that would be very problematic.
Yes, it could potentially happen as well, because here we're talking about new practices, new things, no? So I hope it won't be a case that there will be maybe one or two attempts and then no one bids and then we forget about the whole thing. And I really think it boils down to good communication across the different stakeholders. And in fact, I have a follow-up question in relation to this. Victor, looking ahead, do you see that your office should have a role in promoting this collaboration, this communication between social enterprises or social economy actors and the contracting authorities to make sure that eventually the social value is embedded in tenders?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's worth mentioning that in the past there have been events organized not by us. The Department of Contracts were involved, I believe, even the a number of local councils were involved, which brought together contracting authorities and social economy actors, which included foundations, NGOs, for example, and they spoke with each other. It created a very good opportunity for them to speak. But to talk specifically about the role of the regulator, the answer is yes. So it's very important that the role of the regulator, apart from taking registrations and taking on the annual returns and having a monitoring function, which is very, very important, that we're also looking at promoting the sector. And in this respect, there's no doubt that we will be needing to reach out to entities like SEAM, for example, the Social Entrepreneurs Association in Malta, Cooperative Malta, for instance, and maybe even the chambers, so that we can start speaking to each other. Let's look at what tenders. Let's look at what tenders were issued in the past. What's coming in the future? What does it take to promote collaboration between social economy entities and traditional businesses to bid together? Or what does it take for social economy entities to bid on their own? I mean, there doesn't need to be reliance. It's worth pointing out that over the last 2 years, approximately 50 tenders were awarded to entities that form part of the social economy. Most of them were cooperatives. Now, not all cooperatives are social enterprises, but because of the democratic structure, cooperatives are still, the link with the social economy is clear, is very strong. Something that would be very interesting is to get those cooperatives to have a successful track record in bidding and get them to speak to newcomers.
Yes.
So, how did you do that? How can we do this together? It will be a conversation that needs to be carried out, between them. But surely, from our end, we could create the spaces for these discussions to take place, listening to concerns, maybe even address misunderstandings. Some people think it's overly complicated to bid. Maybe it is the first time, usually when you do something the first time, it is a little bit daunting, but surely by the second time you would have learned your lessons. You have checked what your mistakes were. Why did you not get the tender? With a view that next time round you are hopefully successful.
If I can add to what Victor is saying, in fact, I can confirm that we have in the past years now, months and years now, liaised on this aspect into trying to get social enterprises also into the process. We always talk about a pilot project. We start small, and then we can publish something. We find a contracting authority willing to partake in this pilot project to try from a small project to get people involved in the tendering process. What I can also add is that, as everyone knows, our tendering processes are electronically. Nowadays, we utilize the official platform, the tenders.gov.mt, and we also provide training for economic operators for free, and they can attend for many times that they apply for to familiarize with how they can actually tender. So I think the combination between they have access for free training to familiarize themselves with the electronic tendering platform. And also we from government aspect trying to push a pilot project on a smaller scale so that even the requirements will be proportionate to the project that we would be trying to implement in order to, get the ball started on this aspect. So that is part of the work that we are doing with between the Department of Contracts and Victor. So we hope that we will see the fruit of the background work that we are doing. So that's something that I wanted to compliment Victor's words.
I wasn't aware of the training, Lorraine. I think it's a very, very good initiative, both for social economy enterprises and also for any regular enterprises, including our micro businesses. We know that in Malta we have a huge number of micro businesses and they are a very important part of our economy. So it's good that there are these resources that are available to them. Lorraine, if I if I may, are there any maybe good practice examples, specific examples that you would like to share? They don't have to be from Malta. You mentioned earlier there's a compendium of good practices that was compiled. Maybe some specific examples to inspire our audience a little bit.
Yes, and specifically in relation to the SRPP, as I said, and I proudly mentioned that this was the first time that such a good practices cases book publication was released. That was in June 2020, and it actually it was entitled "Making Socially Responsible Procurement Work," and it's our flagship case study because Malta possibly is one of the few member states or the only member state, I don't know. We use the best price quality ratio, which is one of the award criteria, in order to award precarious services sectors, what we deem as sectors that might fall into precarious working conditions, such as cleaning, security, carers. So we still adopt this practice. We have been doing so for many years now, for around a decade. It is a mandatory awarding mechanism that we use. We have a set of mostly related to employment conditions, and rather than awarding these type of contracts solely on price, we use this award criteria with mandatory social criteria, which include the legal employment conditions, payslip provisions, protection of booked leave, etc., etc. So through this approach, we try to ensure better working conditions and the service quality while also maintaining the value for money. So I think that's our flagship case that illustrates how strategic procurement can deliver the long-term social impact without adding too much complexity to the process, and it is very much guided by the Department of Contracts. So I think that this kind of case aligns both the financial aspect, but more than anything else, the emphasis on the long-term impact on the employees. So I think that's practically aligns also with government's horizontal priority, the well-being of our workforce.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for that. Earlier in my presentation, when we were looking at sort of what is needed, to create momentum in this area, I mentioned we need maybe a clearer policy direction. So maybe I can ask this question to all of you, and whoever wishes to go first, please feel free. But if you had to make one main recommendation to policymakers and to contracting authorities, of course, to make sure that this kind of procurement, be it the socially responsible public procurement, the green procurement, the innovation procurement, to make it a mainstream practice, we want to see more of this, we want it to become the norm. What would be your recommendation to them?
If I may go first, just a thought, but I think people who are designing the policy, they have a bit of a dilemma, because if you are going to then focus on, you have normal tenders, normal procurement, and then you're going to have those who are a bit more reserved for special purposes. That in itself is not a very much an inclusive practice, because you're saying the bulk is going to go towards those who are the less pricey, and then a part of it is sectioned off, cornered off for social enterprises. And with that mindset, usually things don't work in policy. Victor mentioned something maybe in a subtle way, but he said, look, and even people should know this, but the way we're looking now towards cooperatives and social enterprises, they can be legal bodies represented by different organizations. So we can have a company, a VO, a natural person, those together. So in terms of policy, I would stay away from trying to create this separation between the social and the economically impact. For instance, in organizational psychology, we say, if you get the culture, right? Culture is how people interact with each other, right? How the culture, company, the culture of an organization. So it's not the policies, it's not the compensation, it's how people interact with each other. Once you get the culture, right, success is by default. And they also say that great culture is great currency. If you have a company with a great company culture, you're going to actually, at the end, make more profits. So it affects the bottom line. So I think policy should be a bit like that. It shouldn't be like, okay, 80% for the average and 20% for the outliers. So like past now, I think, and it only enforces like something that it's so whoever is designing policy, I think should be thinking of one solid policy that would incorporate every social player of every. So for example, I come from cooperatives. I cannot say anything against companies. I have a company as well myself, and I don't see anything wrong with the company or the corporation. So it's not like us and them, or it's whoever is designing the policy has to create one which has the full integrity.
I think if I may, Ty, I am understanding what Daniel is saying and where he wants to arrive, what he wants to achieve. But obviously we have to start from somewhere. So we have to start from a small percentage, and then eventually that's what I think would be my top recommendation, to integrate the sustainability and the social responsibility and the innovation aspect into the core objectives of every procurement, not as an add-on, but as a standard practice. So that would not then divide between the enterprises themselves. Everyone would be at the same level playing field. That's, I think, what Daniel is saying. And obviously from government end, that is the actual long-term plan, that through these broader policy goals, we provide the clear guidance, we ensure ongoing training and support, and more than anything else, we have this leadership commitment to arrive to that hopefully the cultural change, like Daniel is saying, that we recommend our contracting authorities to find themselves the opportunities to implement the aspects of SRPP until it becomes something embedded across our procurement processes. That's, I think, what
and I agree. I think the fact that you don't take it in steps, that's totally. So the saying, what would be great for a social enterprise would also be something great for any other
exactly
enterprise.
And we mentioned that ultimately
the same life, the same thing, no? So yeah, if you, of course, you would go about it maybe in steps.
In a phased manner.
But whoever is designing policy has to be in a way. I'll give you an example, okay, maybe from my own mistakes. For example, at school, I also say, okay, we have to have, let's say, we used to have an inclusion coordinator. The inclusion coordinator would tell me, then you have to make sure that you are writing enough in Arial size 16 for an exam paper, not size 14, not size 12. And I would say, yes, okay, print, how many people do you want? 20, 30. No, we want to be inclusive, do it for everyone. You can't have a distinction between those who have size 12 or size 8, okay? And that's a different mindset. With the policy, what's good for one, good for the other. It's really, let's make it not, because otherwise, we've seen this in public procurement, where, for example, someone is tendering for something, they would tell him you would need an archaeological report. They go for a cooperative or an archaeological, survey. All right, they tick all the boxes. Once they get the tender, they do whatever they want. There is no archaeologist on site. Why? Because the archaeologist there was used as a means to an end, not as one whole thing. If the archaeologist was a social partner, another partner, therefore benefiting as well economically. If they're building a house project, the archaeologist would be. So if you see it from that point of view, and that is, I think, better policy than the one where we would separate between the social and the non-social.
But earlier, as I agree with you, but as I mentioned earlier, procurement is not just about up until contract signature. What you are mentioning is stricter also controls when it comes to the contract implementation, the contract management.
Yes.
So
Correct.
obviously, we are saying the same thing, but obviously I look at it from the procurement cycle aspect. Your words are in my mind from a procurement cycle aspect. So yes, understandably, I think that that's the ultimate goal, that we arrive to the type of setting that everyone will have an equal level playing field and everyone can bid in our procurement processes without the need to single out that procedure or the other procedure.
Okay.
I think you asked for a piece of advice for policymakers. I mean,
or also even for contracting of authorities.
Yes, okay, sure. I mean, I think we have said this already, but the very first thing we need to realize is we need a change in our mindset on what public procurement means. I think that is very crucial. I believe once contracting authorities start realizing the power they have every single time they spend anything, the power they have in achieving social objectives, I think that they will be inspired. They will themselves be wanting to make sure that social criteria are in, for example. But they need to realize the true power that they have every single time they issue a tender or a call for quote. And surely it will be the responsibility of the regulator, but also of the Department of Contracts to make sure that contracting authorities realize. A second very important thing to understand is that national objectives, national strategies belong to everyone. So if we have a circular economy ambition in Malta, it's not the sole remit of Circular Economy Malta to deal with that. They would be the policy lead. They are the ones who are driving that particular ambition. But it is every single contracting authority that can contribute to that particular strategy. So it is also important that we realize that, look, just because your particular department, your particular public entity does not quite work in the circular economy, doesn't mean that you have nothing to contribute to it. So, we cannot work in silos. That's what I'm saying in a nutshell.
I think that's probably the most important takeaway, the need for collaboration. So we really need to work together, drawing also on what Daniel has said, like doing away with the divisions, and also linking to what Lorraine has inferred in her contribution. I think we really need to put our minds together, put our heads together. The drive is there, the tools are there, the framework is there. So it's really up to us now to use these tools that are available to us to create the change that we need. I think it's a topic that can definitely be explored a lot more. Hopefully we will have the opportunity to do that together once again. But I think for today, we need to wrap up. I just want to thank you all for making the time to be part of this conversation. And I look forward to having the opportunity to share ideas with you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.